All right, so I want to start out with this book. I've shown this book before. I think it was the 1851. This is the 1831. It says Free Negro Owners of Slaves in the United States in 1830. All right, together with absentee ownership of slaves in the United States in 1830. All right, so this is going to go in with the topic. I basically wanted to talk about this family, the Decuirs of Louisiana, and who they were. Just in this book, just real quick, this is created by Carter G. Woodson, letting you know that there was, so-called free Negro owners of slaves. There was people of color that owned slaves. It says here in the forward, this statistical report on the free Negro ownership of slaves was made possible in 1921 when the director of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History obtained from the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial an appropriation for the support of research into certain neglected aspects of Negro history. The special report, however, was not the objective of the research department of the association. It developed rather as a byproduct in compiling statistics for the much larger report on free Negro heads of family in the United States in 1830. The investigators found so many cases of Negroes owning slaves that it was decided to take special notice of this phase of the history of the free Negroes. So they were compiling something else and they're like, whoa, there were so many that had slaves. Wow, let's do another book or census on it, supposedly, right? And in the introduction it says, the aim of this report on the free Negro is to facilitate the further study of this neglected group. Most of these people have been forgotten. For persons supposedly well informed in history are surprised to learn today that about 500,000, almost 1/7 of the Negroes of the country were free prior to the Emancipation in 1865. All right, a lot of people who say they learn and they know history, they would be surprised to know this fact. 500,000, that about 500,000, almost 1/7 of the Negroes of this country were free prior to the Emancipation in 1865. It is hardly believed that a considerable number of Negroes were owners of slaves themselves, and in some cases controlled large plantations. Continues, says, in the South, where almost all the Negro slaveholders were, moreover, we find some of them competing with the large planters in the numbers of slaves they owned. Most of such Negro proprietors lived in Louisiana, South Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia, as did the majority of all such slave owners. There are moreover a few instances of confusing absentee ownership with Negro ownership. Sometimes a free Negro had charge of a plantation but did not own the slaves himself, and the enumerator returned him as the owner. All right, so that was some cases, but in reality, a lot of them were the owners. And Louisiana is one of those states listed here. We're going to speak on some of the Louisiana slave owners in a specific family there, a surname, particular. Just one, for example, that we're going to talk about. I just wanted to show you that he's in here. And this is in the same book. It says documents here, Louisiana, continued, right? And it's listing the people by their counties or parishes where they are. And one of them is Point Coupé Parish. And right here we see the Decuirs or Decuir Antoine. This is a close-up, Point Coupé. All right, so we see Decuir Lefroix and Decuir Antoine Decuir. So that number is slaves in total. So slaves 70, total 76 people he owned at that time in 1830. So in 1830, Antoine Decuir owned about 76 slaves. Antoine Decuir. Who's Antoine Decuir? Free person of color, right? All right, so real quick, want to read from this is The Creole Angel, the Self-Identity of the Free People of Color of Antebellum, New Orleans by Ben Melvin Hobratch, B.A. Thesis prepared for the degree of Masters of Arts, University of North Texas, August 2006. This is in Chapter 2, real quick. The Slaveholding of New Orleans Free People of Color, 1820 to 1840. The study of free black slave ownership has enjoyed substantial attention in the past 30 years. Studies published in recent years have made it increasingly evident that despite the racial similarities between slaveholding free people of color and their slaves, all right, the racial similarities between their, the slave owners and the slaves, most slaveholding free people of color own slaves to exploit their labor. However, despite these profit-minded motives, a slave owner might engage in a benevolent act, such as the manumission of a slave. This chapter seeks to examine the slave ownership of New Orleans free people of color during the antebellum period in an effort to find out more about who these financially privileged free blacks were as well as a little bit about their self-identity during a time in which the Crescent City underwent rapid Americanization. Now it says here, continuing further down in this article, says while each purchase and sale, they're talking about selling of slaves or indentured servants, transfer or manumission of slave is unique. These records can be grouped into similar types of transactions. The first grouping of records are those in which a free person of color is purchasing a slave. For example, many of the notarial records reveal a tendency during the antebellum period among the gens of the color or people of color, free people, libres of color, to purchase English-speaking slaves from Virginia. So who were these slaves from Virginia? In 1822, free man of color, Francois Petit-Jean, purchased 22-year-old Negrice or black woman Sally of Norfolk, Virginia, from J. Nova and P. Martel for $512. The proclivity to acquire bondsmen from Virginia was not unique to free people of color. Ever since the 1808 congressional ban on the importation of slaves from abroad, many slave owners across the western South in states such as Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas purchased their slaves from Virginia, where slave owners were willing to sell slaves to labor-hungry regions for high prices. New Orleans slaveholding free people of color also purchased biracial slaves from Virginia. Rosalie Chesney, a free woman of color, purchased the 20-year-old Virginia-born mulattress or mulatto woman Belinda from Jean B. Mosier in 1822 for $550, only to sell the slave 3 years later for $50 profit to the widow of the prominent white notary Michael de Armas. Continues, says the sale of slaves was not always to whites. It says slaves and money also exchanged hands between free people of color. All right, so they were selling between each other. In 1821, Louis St. Amant sold 4 slaves to Pierre St. Amant for $5,700. 7 months later, Pierre sold 21 slaves to Louis for $30,160. Despite the close connection between these two free people of color, the slaves were sold, not transferred in at competitive prices. All right, people of color doing that. All right, so there's this family that I wanted to basically speak about. I'm going to read an article about, but before I read about them, because they're people of color, I want to read about their ancestors and, you know, the story behind the Decuir family, supposedly, right? So it says Hainaut to Louisiana. So Hainaut, again, is going to tell us where it's from. It says the Decuir family of the United States is descended from our common ancestor, Albert Decuir, 1673-1750, native of Macon, Hainaut, now Belgium, who migrated as one of the earliest colonists to Louisiana in 1720. All right. Albert settled in Pointe Coupee Parish, and his grandchildren prospered on the banks of Falls River and Old Channel of the Mississippi. The name Decuir, the name translated into of leather. Perhaps our ancestors were tanners. The 3 towns of Curie, France, see photo links below, are within an hour's drive south of Macon. All right, so this is right on the border of France and that other place in Belgium, as well as another town of Kurimeo. The only other area in France or Belgium that begins with the letter Cure is a suburb in Lyon, France. The spelling of the name evolved over the years from Decuir to Decuir to Decuir. There is a coat of arms in Flemish registered to the Decuir or similar spelling. Not only coat of arms we have been able to find from pre-20th century, a current day coat of arms which has circulated for the name Decuir is actually modern day artist interpretation and not associated at all with the ancient family from the research we have conducted. So it says Albert Decuir, now the person we're interested in, right? Albert Decuir had 2 sons and several daughters. Anyone bearing the name Decuir today in the United States is probably descended from Albert's son, Jean-Francois Decuir. Jean-Francois, remember these names, Jean-Francois Decuir. As Albert's other son only had a daughter, Julie Eshelman Lee has transcribed the will of Genevieve Mayoux, wife of Jean-Francois Decuir, and has it available online at this link. All right. Sons of Jean-Francois and Genevieve include Jean-Baptiste Francois, Pierre, Antoine, and Joseph. Several of these grandsons of Albert Decuir were large plantation owners. I remember that they were large plantation owners along the Mississippi Valley and the Techee. Many of them served in the Pointe Coupee militia, which was part of Galvez army during the Revolutionary War, making descendants eligible for membership in clubs such as Daughters of the Sons of the American Revolution. All right, we're talking about the Decuir people, their families. All right, Decuir guest book, ancient Decuir family from Europe. All right, some more info right here. Basically, I just wanted to get you familiar with this so-called first Decuir in America, Albert. All right, so real quick, I'm in genie.com, and this is Albert Decuir, or Decuir is the same guy. All right, just so you guys can see. It says death, was born in Hayanat, Belgium, death 1750, in Pointe-Couvert, Louisiana. All right, father of Jean Francois, the guy that was just telling us, most likely the dad of most Decuirs in America. All right, this is in genie.com, and we're on Waikiki, same thing. Alberticus Decuir, Albert Decuir, formerly Decuir, aka Decuir. All right, Macon Haynat, Belgium, son of Simon, the same one. All right, Mary is his wife, father of Jean Francois Decuir. Most of the Decuirs come out of this guy. All right, so just wanted to show you guys this is real people, and as you can see, and you're probably like, well, why are you showing us Europeans, Kurimeo? Well, we'll see, man. We're gonna talk about their descendants right now. This is from the decuirfamily.com website, decuirfamily.com. It's not really much there, but if you click where it says history, it brings you to this page that says Albert Decuir, patriarch, right? Albert Decuir, native of Macon near Chimay, has contracted to be a miner. All right, so he was contracted to be a what? A miner, right? Mining with his wife and 5 children, the 27th of October, 1719 for 6 years with payment of 180 pounds a year. All right, so he was contracted for 6 years. He was doing an indenture and food at 40 pence per day. All right, so he had food and salary. It says, for the Decuir and connected families, they trade of their Creole fabric. All right, the Creole fabric begins with the patriarch Albert Decuir as an engaged indentured servant. He was an indentured servant. This was how the Decuirs came to America, as an indentured servant. Mining, right? Hard labor, indentured servant for the St. Catherine concession. All right, the St. Catherine concession. What is that? We're going to look into what that means. All right, Albert Decuir came to the colony of Louisiana in the late 1720s at the age of 46 from Macon Haynat, present-day Belgium, arriving with his children. It is believed he lost his wife and mother of his children, Marie Catherine Domer, when she died just before or at the port of Lorient prior to their departure to the colony in August 1720. When he embarked on the Lelore, he was enumerated on the ship's manifest as a miner for the St. Rainy concession, at a sister concession of the St. Catherine. Eventually, as a widower and father of his surviving 2 daughters and sons, he settled on the west bank of the Mississippi River in the area known as Pointe-Couperet Parish, Louisiana. Eventually, that's where he ended up. As one of the founding families, Albert became a planter and co-founder and godparent of the St. Francis of Assisi Church. His grandchildren, Jean Francois Decuir, was the first Franco-Creole child baptized in Pointe-Couperet. What does that mean? Jean Francois Decuir was Albert's first known Creole grandchild, born and baptized in the colony of Louisiana. Only known, they're saying, right? They're trying to throw in the little hijack here. By the end of the first Creole generation, Albert's descendants and their connected families were among the most significant in the colony. At the dawn of the territorial era, his grandchildren and their families resided in Pointe-Couperet, Aboyeles, Opelousas, Atacapas, and the German coast. And these are some of the connected family names that include with the Decuirs, and so on and so on. So you can see all the surnames. So they talked about a concession was given to Albert, right? Concession. He had to go, and this concession says the French treasury in 1720 was almost bankrupt, and the Duke of Orleans gave a new charter for the whole of Louisiana to a corporation headed by Scotsman John Law's Company of the Indies, assumed the charter of the Company of the West. Law and Orleans saw the new venture as a way to bring colonists to Louisiana through generous land concessions. All right, so this is what they meant by concession. So when Albert came, right, he came as an indentured servant to work in one of these land concessions. It says to increase trade and to make Louisiana profitable for France at last. During the years that existed under the Company of the Indies, Louisiana enjoyed its first flush of prosperity. More ships arrived under the company's reign than had come to the colony from the time of its founding through the advent of company control. It says outside New Orleans, the company granted land concessions, right, to wealthy Frenchmen along the Mississippi River. Upstart settlers and established elites smuggled trade goods throughout the Mississippi Valley and Caribbean in order to avoid the mercantilist policies of the French crown. They smuggled. You see that? They were taking the real ancient Egypt relics. The growing labor force was made up of peasants and indentured servants. All right, this is a whole different article. I'm not reading the same thing. All right, so it's letting us know that Albert was one of those indentured servants, Decuir. He was one of those from France and Alliance impressed criminals. All right, so peasants, indentured servants, and criminals. Remember, Swiss mercenaries and poorly trained French soldiers and women from Parisian hospitals and asylums, ultimately raising the European population of Louisiana to around 5,000 by 1721. However, the number of European settlers dropped to fewer than 2,000 by the end of the 1720s, due largely to high deals, rates, and decisions of many to abandon the colony. All right, so before we continue and get on to the main characters of this story, the Antoine Decuir, just want to read this from the University of New Orleans. It says here, theses and dissertations, and it says it's called Entwined Threads of Red and Black, The Hidden History of Indigenous Enslavement in Louisiana, 1699 to 1824 by Layla K. Blackbird, University of New Orleans. And this is a thesis submitted to the graduate faculty of the University of New Orleans in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Masters of Arts in History, all right? By Leland Blackbird again. So real quick, we're talking about free people of color owning slaves, right? And owning people that look racially just like them or have the same, of the same complexion, right? Or what be classed as the same race. Now it says here, this study's re-examination of slave records compiled in Gwendolyn Midlow Hall's databases of Afro-Louisiana history and genealogy further demonstrates that indigenous enslavement in Louisiana did not end with the Spanish possession, nor with American rule. In fact, a small minority of full-blooded Indian slaves, again, full-blooded Indian slaves were present in the records all the way into the Antebellum period, meaning a lot of these full-blooded Indian slaves could have been owned by these free people of color of the Antebellum, all right? As were a large number of enslaved natives described by their enslavers as black or mixed race. A number of what? Indians. Described as what? Black. Indians being called black. Indians being called black or mixed race out of 11,670 records to enslaved people not identified as black recorded in Louisiana parishes between 1770 and 1820. 760 people were recorded as Indian, and 1,155 people were recorded as various categories of mixed race Indians. The remaining records consist of people designated by their enslavers as mulatto, and due to the ambiguous racial labels applied to non-whites and the imprecise methodologies used when compiling records by colonial officials, this category also includes many black native people whom deserve to be recognized as such. Many black native people or natives of black complexion. So they're letting us know again. We know that a lot of indentured servants from Europe were filling these plantations and this labor, but also who was the other people getting enslaved or put into indenture? It was Indians, aboriginals from America, right? Not Africans, right? We're not talking about Africans, we're talking about Europeans and Indians being enslaved here as indentured servants. And by whom? Again, this whole area is all French people enslaving, right? And mostly free people of color. Changing notions of race and the construction of racial designations hid enslaved Native Americans within a social order that negated their existence, demonstrating how the social construction of race contributed to the obfuscation and continuation of this enslavement over time. It was through anti-blackness and anti-indigeneity and with the utilization of socially constructed racial designations such as Negro, mulatto, rouge, Greek, mulatto, Greek, Métis, Octoroon, Quadroon, and linguistic variations thereof, that Indianness was controlled and exploited, and that Native Americans and their mixed-race black native descendants continued to be enslaved alongside the larger population of other people of color and other people of color in Louisiana. Subsequently, the enslavement of Native Americans or Aboriginals continued to occur long after slavery in its entirety, or the enslavement of black or native people specifically, had been outlawed in various areas of the Anglo-American colonies in the North, New Spain, or the post-compromise West. All right, so just wanted to show this map again so you guys can see for reference the territory that was, I guess, considered part of France in the United States. You see they had the whole Mississippi, that whole ancient land they were calling what? Is that the real Nile? So when France occupied United States in the 1700s, and supposedly they went to Egypt in the 1700s at the same time, well, they really were here during that same time, the real ancient Egypt. All right, but look at all this vast land they had, and this is the Louisiana Purchase. After that, it became part of another people, right? But you know, this is the vastness of how it was. This is, says map of North America, colonial land, claims 1750. All right, so I'm going to read from this article or book. It says Louisiana History, the Journal of the Louisiana Historical Association. I'm reading from volume 30, number 4, from autumn of 1989, pages 345 to 364, if you'd like to follow up on that. And the article is called Antebellum, Free Persons of Color in Post-Bellum, Louisiana. All right, by Lauren Schresninger, University of North Carolina at Greensboro. All right, now it says here, it seems as if it were a dream. The arrival of the sheriff, the gathering of friends and neighbors, the high-pitched voice of the auctioneer, the shouts and greedy excitement of the bidders. But for Josephine Decuir, it was not a dream, but a harsh reality. Only a decade before, she and her husband, Antoine Decuir Jr., had been among the wealthiest free people of color. So what happened? So just a decade before, they were the wealthiest free people of color, right? This Antoine Decuir Jr. and Josephine Decuir in the South, right? Not just in Louisiana, but in the South. They had owned more than 1,000 acres of fertile land along the river in Pointe-Coupé Parish, raised sugarcane, right? Sugarcane, corn, and rice, and produced wool and molasses. Their total estate, including real property, machinery, livestock, and 112 slaves. Yes, people of color, the Decuirs. Who are these Decuirs who have so much wealth? And the 112 slaves had been worth in excess of 150,000. We're talking about, what is this, 1800s? That's a lot of money today. Again, remember, we don't know, out of these 112 slaves, we're supposed to assume these were all so-called African slaves, right? But that was a false story they told us. We know better now. Indentured servants and aboriginals, Native Americans, American Indians, aboriginals and indentured servants, both black and white indentured servants from Europe and white. So these people of color could, in this 112 slaves, could include people of color, both Europeans, aboriginals, and pale-skinned people as indentured servants. All right, so it says that after Antoine had died during the last year of the Civil War, Josephine had taken over as mistress of this once great plantation. But now, at dusk on the second day of spring in 1871, she listened as the final bids were recorded for her plantation house, stables, cabins, machinery, sugar house, and the remaining 840 acres of her plantation. In a single day, the accumulations of a lifetime had disappeared before the auctioneer's gavel. When the final tally was made, she received only $25,000 for her land and other holdings, an amount which failed even to cover the estate's outstanding debts. All right, so real quick, if you don't understand what's going on, why did she lose her estate? This free person of color, think about it. Now remember, what happened? What happened to all the slaves? What happened to slavery? It was removed, right? People what? Emancipated, right? Remember Abraham Lincoln, the brother, the Swarthy, the so-called Negro, Abraham Lincoln, he freed her slaves. He freed these people's slaves. All right, so they lost everything. When the people got emancipated, they lost everything. The final tally came in, all right, 1871, when she finally lost everything after the Civil War. All her slaves were freed. That included white people too. Abraham Lincoln freed white people, and a lot of them were probably in this plantation, in the Decuir Plantation in Louisiana. You get what I'm showing you, right? The difficulties experienced by Josephine Decuir were by no means unique. During the first 15 years after the Civil War, the landholdings of former free persons of color in Louisiana virtually disappeared. While historians have long shown an interest in the economic activities of Louisiana's free people of color during the pre-war era, they have been less concerned with the fate of this group during the post-war period, nor have they compared this decline to the changes in black wealth holding patterns in the southern states. This is perhaps understandable, since tracing a small group of fewer than 4,000 families following the emancipation of more than 330,000 slaves presents unique problems. All right, you get what's going on? So when all these people were getting freed, you always thought, they always told us, we thought it was all these white people losing all these so-called black people as slaves, and that they were being freed, and it was like all good and everybody was free now, and all these white people had to lose all their stuff. But it wasn't like that in reality always. And a lot of the people, majority in the southern Louisiana, I mean, one of the biggest slave owners in North Carolina, it was so-called black person. And I'm gonna do a future video on him too. All right, so tune in for that. I'm gonna show you that. So a lot of people lost their labor, their indentured servants, right? Their chattel property, as they treated some of these people. And it wasn't just white pale-skinned people. As you can see, Josephine lost hers, and it was happening a lot. Yet in some ways, an analysis of the difficulties they confronted after the Civil War shows more clearly their unique and privileged pre-war status than does an examination of the antebellum period. This essay seeks to examine the remarkable economic ascent of Louisiana's free people of color, the problems they confronted before and during the war, and the precipitous decline during the post-war era. It does so by focusing on property ownership, a key variable to understanding relative economic condition, and by comparing the wealth holdings of free blacks and former free blacks with whites. It also attempts to unravel the complex social and cultural changes which occurred as a result of emancipation and connect them with the economic changes which took place. It was due to the emancipation. These free people of color, the Decuirs, who come out of the and Albert Decuir. I'm going to show you the link right now. All right. All right. So we got Albert Decuir, the very first Decuir, right? His son was Jean Francois Decuir. We're going to click on him. Francois Decuir, right? We're on Wiki3. We're going to Geni. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to click on Jean Francois Decuir, his son, right? Jean Francois Decuir, right? Okay, both Geni and Wiki3. Now we're going to click on his son, Joseph Antoine Decuir. All right, Joseph Antoine Decuir. All right. Now I want you to know and see that all these people are marrying, you know, like this lady, Francois Bellevue. We're going to read about her. She was a very prominent lady as well, and a free person of color who owned a lot of slaves as well. And she's known as a Creole family person of color. But there's no information here of them mixing with any African so-called slaves or anybody who's a slave. These are all French people. These are black French peoples, what I'm trying to show you, all right? So Joseph Antoine Decuir, then we're gonna go into Antoine Decuir, all right? And then that's senior, Antoine Decuir the second, or Antoine Decuir Jr., right? And his wife, Josephine, right? So Antoine Decuir second or junior, and his wife Josephine Delphine Dubiclet, the Dubiclet, this prominent family. All right, we're gonna read about them. The Dubiclets, they were arranged. So the Decuirs and the Dubiclets, two prominent families in the parish, county right there, they decided to marry their kids, Joseph and Antoine. All right, so they can keep the family going in the plantation. That's why they were so wealthy. Now, this is very familiar to what the Huguenots were doing, right? And this family is most likely a Huguenot family from even Belgium. These are French, even though they were in Belgium. We know a lot of French ended up in Belgium. All right, and again, this was very close to France, the city that he was coming from. It was almost at the border. So Antoine Decour II, Josephine, Delphine, even on Jeannie, we go down. Joseph Antoine Decour, all right, and we get to Antoine Decour. That's Antoine Decour right here. And then we get to father of Antoine Decour. That's the second one, right? That's Antoine Decour Jr. And again, husband of Josephine Delphine Decour, all right? So free people of color, right? The Decours. Not showing any. If you go up, right, son of Antoine Decour, we go again so you can see. Son of Antoine Decour, and he was the husband of Poupon Decours, Decoux. The Decoux are also, these is a Huguenot family, the Decoux. I can trace back to the first Decoux, the Huguenot family, Decour, right? Now we go up again. His dad, Joseph Antoine Decour, married, husband of Marie Francois de Bellevue. Again, that's not a slave or an Indian, that's another French prominent. And it keeps going again to Jean Francois Decour, and then to Albert. All right, these people, free people of color who we were just reading about, all right, who lost everything, right? They had 112 slaves, as you can see here, 112 slaves. They lost everything. They come from Europeans, black Europeans. Now, I want anybody, if you want to challenge this and debate this, I want you to prove to me and all of us, show us the sources when you do, that this person is, they're being called free people of color or persons of color because they're mixed with African slaves. Prove that to us, because the genealogy doesn't show that. The history is talking about something else. All right, and I wanted to continue reading this a little bit more. One of the most important traditions emerging from the colonial to the American periods was the ability of free persons of color to enjoy the same rights and privileges as whites with regards to ownership of property and their possession of real estate and slaves. One law stated they could not be molested, injured, or ill-treated under the penalties provided by laws for the safety and security of the property of white persons. In addition, free blacks could petition the government for redress of grievances, sue and be sued, testify in court against whites, be baptized, married, and buried with the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church, secure in education, and enter any occupation or business. While these privileges came under attack during the post-1820s period, the state's unusual customs with regard to free people of color contrasted sharply with the proscriptive laws, mores, and institutions confronting blacks in other regions of the South. All right, so, you know, these people had different kind of privileges almost here. All right, just want to show you something here. I got Antoine Decour, all right, in ancestry.com. He's listed as a mulatto here, right? He's listed as a mulatto. But he's from two you know, prominent, you know, European families and people. All right, so I just want to show you the census. He's listed here as an agriculture, in the industry as agriculture. All right, so let me zoom in where he's at, Antoine Decour, right? And it shows him as a planter, right? Doesn't say slave owner. So a lot of times you might see this in your family's genealogy. You go back so far, you might see them as planters. You know, they had laborers, right? You know, they had a big farm and they were, you know, farming, and they're listed as planters, but this ain't a slave schedule right here. So they ain't going to say nothing about that. But right here, again, you can see Josephine, his wife, and Antoine Decour. He's a real people. All right, he's a planter. He's not a slave. He's a free person of color, right? He's a planter. Right here we got Antoine Decour, 1850. About a land grant or some land he was purchasing. Antoine Decour. Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Department of Interior. We got Antoine Decour here. Land in New Orleans. All right, it says he has total acres, 421 acres right here. All right, so that's recorded. This is an ancestry that, again, that comes as Decour marriage, Creoles of color of the Gulf South, edited by James H. Dorman. Decour says marriage contracted February 26, 1835, clans developed between the intermarrying families. All right, this is what I was talking about. Let me see if I can zoom in into this. All right. Now it says networks extended beyond economic affairs to marriage. All right, education, religion, language, and social and cultural values. To a remarkable degree, colored Creoles married within their group. Occasionally, the wishes of parents were ignored and children ran away with slaves, free blacks or whites, but most often they married their own kind. They married their own kind. Who does that sound like, right? The Huguenots, right? In some locations, marriage contracts were signed and or others were less formal arrangements. In either case, parents were heavily involved with their choice of mates, and mobile young Creoles of color invariably intermarried with one another of a half dozen families. In 1830, Joseph Lauren married Isabella Chastain. So it wasn't like they were just marrying the slaves. They're slaves, right? And that's why they're colored. These people were already people of color. All right, in 1830, it says Basil, also spelled Basil. Dubroca married Louisiana. All right, and so on and so on. And down here it says the situation was the same in Louisiana. Marital arrangements were made between Donato, Million, Simeon, Guillory, and Lamel families in St. Laundry Parish, the Reggio Oliver and Leonard families in Plague Mines, the Lawrence and Metoyer families, the Nashi Toshis, and the Decuir and Dubiclet families in Pointe Coupe. In the case of Antoine Decuir and Antoine Dubiclet, whose son and daughter were married in 1835. They're talking about Antoine Jr. and Josephine, Dubiclet's daughter. The two wealthy planters drew up a 4-page document in French specifying the date of the wedding, the size of the dowry, and the arrangements for future property distribution. Colored Creoles placed a high value on education. Most were literate in significant proportions. At least until the 1830s and 1840s, spoke and wrote in French. All right, a lot of documents I was reading of this Decuir is in French. All right, so again, just wanted to show you how they were doing it. They weren't just marrying anybody, they were marrying each other. They're not marrying slaves that often or at all that much. All right, this was a family thing, a tradition they were doing. I wanted to show you that. Okay, I wanted to show you this. This is a history of black business in America, capitalism, and race. This is like a document on ancestry.com of Antoine Decuir. Again, this is here, table 6.2, wealth holding of representative leading black entrepreneurs, 1820-1861. And again, we have, let me see, and right here we have Antoine Decuir, sugar planter, says right here, sugar planter. Remember, he's a person of color, 151,000 assessed wealth. And we have Dubiclet, Auguste Dubiclet. That's the other guy who married his daughter Josephine to the other Antoine. All right, they're all here. They're all, you can see these lists, these people. These are all mostly black Europeans with French surnames. All right, or French ancestry somewhere in there. Antoine Decuir, it says here 1840 United States federal census. Now this is more of like a slave thing or who he owned. Let me zoom into this. It says Pointe Coupe, Louisiana, colored persons, free colored persons, males, free colored persons, males, females. All right, that tells you here free white. So they list free white people. Why do they list free white people? Why do they even say free white person, including heads of family? That means there was whites who were not free. Because if they have to specify free, that means there was whites who were not free. All right, so this is again what they're saying. And I think Antoine Decuir is somewhere here. And Antoine Decuir is right here, Antoine Decuir. And, just listen to him. But again, 1840s, this is like a slave thing. And this is Antoine Decuir. It says in the 1850 U.S. federal census, slaves scheduled. Antoine Decuir, spelled differently here, but it's the same person. It says number of enslaved people, 105. And it tells you, it doesn't list their names. See, they're treated like property. They're just female, male, female, male. It tells you all the slaves he had. Now, again, remember, a lot of these were pale-skinned people. A lot of these were other black indentured Europeans or, again, aboriginals. All right, again, Antoine Decuir right here. Antoine Decuir. And it lists them with about 100. See, 100 slaves right here on this page. Antoine Decuir. Now, again, all these people listed here are, I just want to show you, it says color, description, color, right? It says B, right? B for black, right? Antoine Decuir. He's listed as what? B, black, right? He owned slaves. Now I'm going to go to the page before this one, all right? Just so you can see, it has other people. Let me see. Oh, we got, right? David Montemayor, something, something, and he's also, let's see, he's black. He's also black, right? Now these are, again, what is this part right here? This is names of slave owners, right? Names of slave owners, all right? Those are the slave owners. We got another one right here. He's Miss Sells, can't really read that, but again, he's B, he's black. He owns slaves too. This is a whole federal census showing you, again, what the book we read in the beginning, free people of color who are slave owners. This is another census proving that right here. Antoine, right? You thought you didn't, no, they didn't teach us this history. All right, so now also on Ancestry, we have this article here that says owning slaves. Now it says here, even though history does record that free black people, also called gens de couleur or people of color, owned slaves, most black people hope that it was never any of their relatives. This is the same way that most black people hope that none of their relatives fought for the Confederacy, but they did. The record bears forth that Raymond Porchy and his wife Claire Decuir Porchy did in fact own slaves. All right, so these are people of color. Again, another one, Raymond Porchy, very prominent, another European family who are also people of color who also own slaves, marrying another Decuir, Claire Decuir. Who's Claire Decuir? This is recorded in the French language in the Pointe-Coupé Parish Courthouse from the Louisiana Slave Record 1719-1820 comes the following record about Tom. He was a black male, age 28, born about 1785 in the British mainland. All right, boom, big one right there. I hope you guys understood what I just read there. All right, they're letting you know a big one right there. So one of their slaves, Tom, who was a black male who was 28, he was born where? In the British mainland. He's from Britain. He's from England. He's a black man from England who's a slave to these Decuir and Raymond Porchy. All right, these, again, proof is what I'm trying to show you. This is proof. You can research this if you like. Research it if you like. All right, this is history. This black English European Tom was a slave to other black Europeans here in America. All right, Tom, he was black male, again, born in the British mainland. So seller, Hippolyte Porchy, buyer, Raymond Porchy. So they were selling between each other, probably family. Free black, amount $700. Date January 3rd, 1813. About Henry, he was a black male, born in the British mainland. Again, another one. So two people, right? Tom and Henry, both of them black males, born in British mainland, born in the British mainland in England. Inventory worth $800. All right, so Claire Decuir, right, who was married to Raymond Porch, right? These are the other ones who own slaves. Those two English people, they own those two English people. Again, who is Claire Decuir? She's actually Joseph Antoine Decuir's daughter. Who was Joseph Decuir again? Joseph Decuir is the son of Jean-Francois Decuir and the grandson of Albert, the indentured servant, the first Decuir who came. Remember him? So again, we go down the line from Jean-Francois down to Jean-Francois, his son, down to Joseph Antoine Decuir, and his daughter is Claire Decuir, the one who married Raymond Porch. All right, Raymond Porch. And again, and just to show you Raymond Porch, his dad is Vincent Porch. He was born in Coupe, and then you go up his line. These are, again, they're married with each other. That Raymond Porch is a colored man too, right? So he's supposed to be what? Mixed with a so-called slave at some point, supposedly, right? But nowhere in his genealogy does it show that his parents or ancestors married into slaves or anything like that. They're from prominent families, actually. All right, Vincent Porch is his dad, and he's born in Louisiana too. When you go to his dad, who's also named Vincent, now you get to France. You see, they came from France. All right, the Porches, the car Porch, yeah, they own Porch. Remember who these people are? These Huguenots, these are Sephardic Jews and Moors. They're into the commerce and the businesses. Remember how many car names we ran over so far in the last couple of videos with these French people, right? They own all these car marks. So again, we go back down to Vincent Porch, And then we go to Raymond Porch, the husband of Claire Decuir. All right, these are all people of color from Europe. So we're back in the article Antebellum Free Persons of Color in Postbellum Louisiana by Lauren Schwarzenegger. And she continues talking about, how they were very successful. It says, as a result, Louisiana's free persons of color emerged as the most prosperous group of blacks in the South. By the 1830s in New Orleans and smaller towns and cities, they owned mercantile stores, grocery stores, and tailoring shops. They also worked as brick masons, carpenters, coopers, stonemasons, mechanics, shoemakers, cigar makers, and in other capacities as skilled artisans. In rural parishes, Creoles of color managed productive farms and plantations, raising cotton, sugar, rice, and corn, and owning herds of cattle, sheep, and horses. One of the most successful planters was Jean-Baptiste Moulin of St. Landry Parish, who farmed 1,240 acres along Bouillou Teach, but in each of half-dozen other parishes, prosperous planters and farmers had emerged. Plaquemines Parish sugar planters Andrew Dunford, Louis Oliver, Adolphe Reggio, and St. John the Baptist Parish slave owner Louisa Point, Pointe-Coupee Parish cotton planter Zachary Honoré, Iberville Parish plantation owners George Desloney, Antoine Dubouclet, and Cyprien Ricard, and Natchitoches slave masters Nicolas Augustus Metoyer and Mary Suzanne Metoyer and Dominique Metoyer. Again, they're letting you know these are all people of color. All right, these are all these people that we read had slaves, and we was reading the census just now. All these people in the history, these are all people of color, so-called black people. To maintain their businesses and agricultural enterprises, free persons of color purchased increasing numbers of slave laborers. All right, by 1830, slave ownership had become widespread among free blacks in Louisiana. In New Orleans, 753 free persons of color were members of the slaveholding class. 753 people were members of the slaveholding class, including 25 who owned at least 10 bondsmen and women and 126 who owned between 5 and 10 slaves. Business women Eulalie de Mandeville McCarty, who owned a wholesale mercantile and dry goods store, distributed her commodities to retail outlets with a large slave labor force. She owned a total of 32 blacks. In 8 rural Louisiana sugar and cotton parishes, 43 Creoles of color, 1.2% of the total number of free black masters in the country, owned a total of 1,327 blacks, or nearly 1 out of 9 slaves owned by Negroes in the United States. In St. John the Baptist Parish, 3 plantation owners held 139 blacks in bondage, an average of 46 slaves each. In Pointe-Coupee Parish, 8 planters owned 297 slaves, an average of 37 slaves each. And in Iberville Parish, 6 planters owned 184 bondsmen and women, an average of 31 slaves each. In all, in 1830, 965 Negro slave owners owned 4,206 bonds. See, they just gave you a little hint there. Bonds people, indentured servants, not slaves. Indentured servants, bonds people. 965 Negro slave owners. They were what? Negro slave owners. And they owned what? 4,206 bonds people. And you think that in those 4,206 people doesn't include white pale-skinned people? Well, we already know the history. Yes, it does. They were coming here by the thousands. And this also includes aboriginals, as we read earlier. That was going on heavily there in Louisiana. These were the highest totals in the South. Nearly 1 of 3 free Negro families in the state was a slaveholder. Our highest numbers in the South, like their white neighbors, some were benevolent masters. Some were good, granting their blacks special privileges, emancipating especially loyal servants, respecting the sanctity of slave families. But the reality is that most of these free Negro slave owners considered their blacks as chattel property. And I know a lot of you don't like hearing that, like, why you gotta condemn, why you gotta make us look bad and ancestors look bad, why you trying to make all black people be slaves now, Kurimeo? Because that's what a lot of people saying now, right? Because they don't understand, they don't even watch my videos, all right? And you follow them, but hey, it's okay, but this is just real history, and we can't ignore this. This ain't about sugarcoating anything, about hurting people's feelings, all right? It's about truth. It's about, that us kinfolk ain't kinfolk. It's the reality. And it was business at some point. It wasn't personal to these people. It was business. Like, again, they just told you right here, most considered their blacks as chattel property. They were bought, sold, mortgaged, willed, traded, and transferred fellow Negroes, all right, fellow Negroes demanded long hours in the fields and severely disciplined recalcitrant blacks. A few seemed as callous as the most profit-minded whites, selling children away from parents, mothers away from husbands, and brutally whipping slaves who ignored plantation rules. These were black people doing this. Yes, I want you get that in your head. These were so-called black people doing this to other black people. You want to be, you always want to blame the white man for everything. You want to say everything's white and the Mongols are doing this and all that. But this is a history you never want to talk about. Now you want to say I'm trying to point it out when I'm trying to remind you of a history that you never talk about, that adds into your history, personal history. This is history, and this affected a lot. This changes history right here. What we're reading right now, they never taught us this in school. Imagine if they would have told us all this when we were kids, right? Did they ever show us a movie of a black Negro plantation slave master whipping another so-called fellow Negroes? They call them here fellow Negroes, whipping them? No, right? That would have had a strong psychological effect on all of us in the world. On sugar estates where the harvesting and pressing of the cane demanded, as it did in the Caribbean, 16 and 18-hour workdays, mulatto owners pushed their slaves incessantly, and when women were unable to work such long hours, they stocked their plantation with young men. Among the 28 fields hands on Louis Oliver's estate, the men outnumbered the women 3-1. In the age group 15 to 36, the ratio was 4-1. Only 2 women had any children. You might think master that day would be good to our own nation. One anonymous slave told a white traveler, but they is not. All right, that's what the slave is saying. They like us, but they not like us. They're not treating us the same. They treating us bad, just like the white man. He's saying these are different people. They don't care about us. I will tell you the truth, massa. I know I've got to answer, and it's fact. They is very bad master, sir. All right? He would rather be a servant to any man in the world than to a black man. You hear that? He said it was actually worse. There was a big difference between the slave niggas and the owner N-words. One freeborn black said, describing St. Mary Parish planter Romain Verdum, as much difference between them as between the white folks and cooled folks. Now we're almost done with this article and continuing. It says, at the outbreak of the Civil War, most free persons of color in Louisiana supported the Confederacy, all right? You thought it was only white people in the Confederacy, right? No. A lot of the early Republicans were black. That's a future video. And a lot of the Confederate supporters were black. In 1861, they organized 2 splendidly equipped battalions, modeled after the French Chasseurs d'Afrique, it says, to fight for the South. In all, more than 3,000 Louisiana free Negroes, 3 out of 4 adult free men of color in the state, joined colored military or militia units. Some of them, one observer recalled, were as strongly in favor of the rebellion as the various fire eater from South Carolina. As slave owners and property owners, they looked with sorrow and sadness at the intrusion of Union gunboats and the occupation of New Orleans early in the war, and even as some of them were adjusting to the presence of Northern soldiers, a few others, including St. Landry's Parish, Charles Lutz, Jean-Baptiste Pierre Auguste, and Lefroy Pierre Auguste were fighting as regulars in the Confederate Army, seeing action at Shiloh, Fredericksburg, and Vicksburg. Still others supported the Southern cause by donating slave laborers to work on fortifications, purchasing Confederate bonds, or providing food and supplies for the Army. It says here, during the war, Antoine and Josephine Decuir, all right, because of the war, they were forced to mortgage their house, the adjoining land, and even their crops. So again, we just read about the Decuirs, right? They owned all that land. And what happened because of Abraham Lincoln? He messed these black people up. Abraham Lincoln messed these black people up. He didn't help these black people. He messed these black people up. You calling everybody black, right? Everybody's a Moor. Everybody's black. Well, that Moor, Abraham Lincoln, messed these other Moors up. You get what I'm saying? You know, history is not black and white. How they told us. You got to rewrite it. All right, again, letting you know, because of what happened, the emancipation of slaves, they lost everything. They had to mortgage their house, the adjoining land, even their crops. The Decuir family in Natchitoches Parish, declining since the 1850s, experienced a final economic disaster during the Depression of the 1870s. In the first year of the Depression, 1873, 44 members of the family were listed as having had their land sold at tax sales. Often these sales were conducted for non-payment of assessments amounting to only a few dollars. Following the death of their mother in 1866, Andrew Dunford Jr. and his sister Rosemma Dunford struggled desperately to regain the antebellum production of sugar that had made their father one of the richest free Negroes in the United States. All right, you hear that? One of the richest Negroes in the United States. How? Through sugar production, plantation, slave labor. All right. But in 1874, besieged by creditors, they were forced to sell St. Rosalie Plantation for a few $1,000s. In St. Mary Parish, once affluent mulattoes eked out a subsistence on small plots on their old plantations. All right, so these black people are being disenfranchised, right? And you see how the emancipation wasn't good for all so-called black people. During the 1860s, the mean value of real estate held by black planters in the state dropped from nearly 10,000 to under 2,000, a decline greater than the general depreciation in post-war property values. So we got this person right here, the so-called Negro, Abraham Lincoln, right, a person of color, a so-called black man, emancipating all these indentured servants, both black and white. And what did he do to the people in Louisiana? Well, he kind of messed up, these people's wealth and stuff that were in Louisiana, these descendants of, these Europeans, a lot of them most likely Huguenots, a lot of them Sephardic Jews and Moors. Their ancestry is really deep. It's not just that they came from Belgium and that's where it starts, or they're from France, but there's a deep history there. So, you guys saw the Huguenot video and all the other Swarthy Europe videos, and we know there was a lot of the indentured servant videos. We know this Albert was an indentured servant. So there's a whole deep history in this video I wanted to show real quick. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time to watch. I got a lot of more videos coming, and just take care, and Hawa bless.